By the time my mother told the entire church fellowship hall that I was comfortable because life had spared me the burden of children, I had already stopped feeling the kind of shame she wanted from me. My brother Callan stood near the coffee urn with his face arranged into wounded innocence, while his wife Sloane tilted her head and said, "It's hard to call it baby money when there's no baby, Avery." The room went so quiet that I could hear a plastic fork scrape against a paper plate. My mother, Runa Carver, smiled at me like she had finally placed me exactly where she wanted me in public, surrounded by family, too civilized to embarrass her back. I did not cry. I did not defend the 4 years my husband and I had spent saving for treatments that kept failing. I only rested my hand on the black folder beside my chair and let her keep talking, because the bank alert, the signed note, the screenshots, and the account records were already inside it, waiting for the moment her confidence became evidence. Welcome back to Revenge Stories. This is a story about family betrayal, public humiliation, hidden financial proof, and the quiet kind of revenge that does not arrive with shouting. It arrives with dates, statements, signatures, and a woman who finally understands that love and access are not the same thing. To understand why I stayed calm in that church hall while my mother tried to make my private grief sound like a public weakness, I have to take you back 7 days earlier, to the afternoon I carried a peach cobbler to my parents' house and heard my future being spent before I even knocked. I was standing on their side porch with the cobbler still warm under a towel when I heard my brother say he was out of options. The kitchen window above the sink was cracked open because my mother liked the smell of rain, and their voices slipped out through the screen as clearly as if I had been sitting at the table with them. Callan said the lender had started calling Sloane's job. He said the last food truck loan was tied to their apartment deposit. He said if the collectors pushed any harder, everything would start falling apart before the end of the month. Then my mother made the soft little sound she always made when she had decided someone else would solve the problem. "Avery will cover it," she said, calm as butter on toast. "She's always been sensible. She knows family comes first." I stood there with my hand half raised, the porch boards damp beneath my shoes, and waited for my father to object. Ellis Carver had spent most of my life disagreeing with my mother only in his eyebrows, but some childish part of me still expected him to say that maybe I should be asked before my savings became a rescue plan. He did not. He only cleared his throat and said, "She has that money put away, doesn't she?" My brother answered too quickly. "She and Miles don't even have kids. What else is it for?" There it was, said casually by the people who had watched me smile through failed appointments, holiday pregnancy announcements, and baby showers where I folded tiny clothes for other women. They knew enough to hurt me. They just did not know enough to be ashamed. I set the cobbler on the porch rail and walked back to my car with my keys clenched so tightly the metal teeth marked my palm. I did not slam the door. I did not peel out of the driveway. I drove home at exactly the speed limit because when something inside me breaks, it does not make me wild. It makes me precise. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had counted every dollar Miles and I had saved. $68,420. Not inherited money. Not lucky money. Not extra money sitting around because life had spared us responsibilities. It was 10 years of repaired appliances, secondhand furniture, shared lunches, postponed vacations, and 2 people refusing to give up on the possibility of a child even after hope had become expensive. Miles was at the kitchen counter stripping copper wire from an old light fixture when I walked in without the cobbler. He looked at my empty hands first, then at my face, and set the tool down with the kind of quiet that always made room for the truth. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. So I did. I told him about the porch, the open window, my mother's voice, my father's silence, and my brother's question about what our money was even for. I expected anger. I expected him to grab his keys and head over there with all the fury I was too tired to carry. Instead, he leaned back against the counter and looked at me the way he looks at a faulty breaker panel, not with panic, but with focus. "Before you talk to them," he said, "move the money out of reach. Not tomorrow after you've slept on it. Tonight. Protect the account first. Then decide how generous you feel." That sentence saved more than our savings. It saved the part of me that had been trained to think every family crisis required my immediate surrender. Miles did not take my laptop from me. He did not ask for passwords or make calls as if I were fragile. He just opened the door to a thought I had never allowed myself to have. My money did not have to sit where my mother could imagine it. My future did not have to remain visible to people who had already begun dividing it up. I made tea I did not drink, sat at the kitchen table, and started doing what I do for a living. I am not an accountant with a dramatic office or a glass wall. I manage books for a bakery, a veterinary clinic, and a small roofing company that would fall into chaos if I did not remind the owner that invoices are not emotional suggestions. Numbers are where I go when people try to make confusion sound like love. The first thing I learned that night was how exposed I had been. My old savings account was not joint, but my mother knew the bank, knew the approximate balance because I had once been foolish enough to mention it, and knew about an old caretaker account connected to my grandmother's medical bills. Years earlier, when my grandmother Iris was sick, my mother and I had opened a shared checking account to pay nurses, prescriptions, and hospice supplies. Grandma died. The account went quiet, and life moved on. But quiet is not closed. I had left one small door in the wall because I had never imagined my mother would test it. That was the first naive thing I lost that week. The next morning, I opened a new account at a credit union across town, one my family had never used, and began moving the savings in careful portions with confirmations printed and downloaded. I also changed passwords, removed old transfer links, canceled account visibility, and set alerts for every account that had ever brushed against my family's hands. It was not glamorous. It felt like cleaning a room after someone had gone through your drawers. The betrayal was in the dust, in the open boxes, in the sudden knowledge that privacy is something you sometimes have to rebuild after the people closest to you decide your boundaries are optional. When the final transfer landed, I stared at the new balance in the new place and felt no triumph. I felt a quiet, exhausted relief, like I had carried a sleeping child out of a burning house without waking anyone. My mother called before lunch, soft and warm and false enough to make my teeth ache. She asked about Miles. She asked whether the rain had reached our side of town. She asked whether I had been sleeping, which was how she began whenever she planned to say something that would make sleeping harder. Then she drifted toward Callan. "Your brother is humiliated," she said. "He made some mistakes, but marriage is hard, business is hard, and people deserve a chance to recover." I made the little sounds she expected from me, the gentle hums and pauses that had once meant I was preparing to help. When she finally said, "We may need to look at that old account from your grandmother's care just to see what options we have," I understood that she had not merely assumed I would pay. She had already chosen the handle on the door. I told her I had a client waiting and ended the call with my voice still pleasant. Then I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. My mother had a map of my usefulness in her head. There was the daughter who could be guilted. There was the old account that could be mentioned. There was the husband who would stay out of family matters if she smiled enough. There was my infertility, the softest bruise, available for pressure if ordinary guilt did not work. I had thought love made me visible. I was beginning to understand that usefulness had made me predictable. Callan came by 2 days later without warning, which was his favorite way to make other people prove they were available. He parked across the sidewalk, walked into my kitchen with damp hair and a rehearsed sigh, and acted as if the visit pained him more than it inconvenienced me. He talked for 40 minutes without ever asking for money in a clean sentence. The food truck had been a disaster because the location was bad, because the city permit office was corrupt, because customers were cheap, because Sloane's cousin had promised marketing help and vanished. Then the truth slipped out between excuses. A private loan, interest, missed payments, a gambling app he called sports investing, until I looked at him long enough for the phrase to shrivel. $52,000. That was the whole. "You and Miles are stable," he said, glancing at the kitchen cabinets we had painted ourselves. "Some of us are actually trying to build something." My phone buzzed while he was still talking. The message was from Sloane, and it had the polished cruelty of someone who had asked a mirror how to sound injured. She wrote, "I hope you're not going to make this about your treatments again. Family with real emergencies should come before imaginary nursery plans." I read the words once, then again, not because I needed to hurt myself twice, but because I wanted to remember the exact shape of what they thought they had the right to say. Callan watched my face and asked who it was. I turned the phone over and refilled his coffee. "Keep talking," I said. And he did, because people who expect your surrender rarely notice when your silence has changed jobs. After he left, I opened a folder on my desktop and named it with a date instead of an emotion. That mattered. An angry file can look like revenge. A dated file looks like a record. I saved Sloane's message, my mother's call history, the transfer confirmations, and the alert settings. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled down the plastic bin where old papers went to be forgotten. I found check copies, handwritten notes, bank stubs, a hospital parking pass from Grandma's last winter, and one folded sheet of notebook paper I had not seen in years. It was signed by Callan in blue ink, back when he needed $6,000 to keep his first business from collapsing, and had joked that I should charge interest like a bank. He had written, "I, Callan Carver, owe Avery $6,000 and will repay her when the truck starts turning profit." The truck had not turned profit. The $6,000 had not returned. The joke had survived better than the business. I built the ledger that night. Date, amount, purpose, proof, repaid, apartment deposit, car repair, emergency dental bill, food truck license, insurance lapse, rent shortage, Grandma's uncovered medication that my mother said she would split and never did, holiday groceries when my parents hosted people they could not afford to feed. Each entry looked harmless alone. Together they became a biography of extraction. $31,970 had left my life and entered theirs over the years, not including the $52,000 they were preparing to claim next. The repaid column was almost insulting in its simplicity. 0, 0, 0, 0. A whole family history reduced to a row of empty returns. My father called on Friday evening, and I nearly answered like a daughter instead of like a witness. His voice has always had a way of making me younger. Ellis was never cruel in the obvious ways. He did not mock or demand. He faded. He let my mother steer and then looked sad when the car hit something. He told me Runa was scared, that Callan was in real trouble, that he knew the words had come out wrong, but families sometimes had to absorb each other's burdens. Then he told me the story he always saved for emergencies, about my mother losing her childhood apartment when her father's debts caught up with them, about a sheriff at the door, about boxes on a lawn. I believed the story. I even believed the fear. But then he said gently, almost kindly, "You've always been the one who could handle these things, Avery." And the spell broke. He had not called to protect me from my mother's fear. He had called to make her fear my assignment. On Saturday morning, the bank alert came. Someone had attempted to move funds from the old caregiver account. Not much was there, only a little under $3,000. Most of it old deposits my mother had made years ago and never touched. But the attempt told me everything. My mother had gone to the bank before she came to me with a full, honest request. She had reached for the one handle she thought she still had. She had expected that old account to lead somewhere bigger, maybe through linked transfers, maybe through pressure, maybe through the sheer confusion people create when they treat money like fog. Instead, she found what I had left there on purpose, her own remaining balance, clean and untouched, because I was not interested in stealing from my mother. I was interested in ending the story she had been writing with my signature. By Sunday, Runa changed the location of the conversation. She sent a message saying we would all sit down after service at the church fellowship hall because neutral ground will help everyone stay loving. I laughed for the first time all week, not because anything was funny, but because the strategy was so naked it almost deserved applause. Neutral ground meant witnesses. Neutral ground meant elderly women who remembered me bringing casseroles after funerals and would not understand why I could not bring $52,000 after my brother's bad decisions. Neutral ground meant my mother could turn refusal into spectacle and make me look cold if I did not bleed politely. I answered with 4 words, "I'll be there Sunday." Miles read the message, looked at me, and asked if I wanted him beside me. I said yes, but not in front. That distinction mattered more than I expected. I did not want a husband rescuing me from my family because that would become another story they could tell, that Miles had poisoned me, hardened me, taken me away from the people who loved me first. I wanted him there as a witness, as a steady weight in the room, as the one person who knew what our savings meant when everyone else kept calling it extra. He nodded and helped me print the final packet. He did not add a speech. He did not tell me what to say. He simply placed each page in order, squared the stack, and wrote Runa's balance on a sealed envelope containing the money from the caregiver account. His handwriting was plain and blocky. Somehow that made me want to cry more than any insult had. The church basement smelled like coffee, carpet cleaner, and sugar glaze when we arrived. People were still folding tables after the fellowship brunch. Children were weaving between chairs, and the old women from the prayer circle were guarding the dessert leftovers like national treasure. My mother had chosen the corner near the bulletin board, public enough to be seen but private enough to pretend she had not staged anything. Callan and Sloane were already there. My father sat with his hands around a foam cup, looking older than he had a week earlier. Runa kissed my cheek as if there were no bruise beneath the skin. "Good," she said, smiling too widely. "We can finally stop all this tension and do what's right." It began politely because public cruelty often does. My mother said Callan had made mistakes, but mistakes did not erase blood. She said Sloane was under terrible stress. Sloane placed a hand on her stomach, not pregnant, just theatrical, and said the stress had been affecting her sleep, her appetite, her whole sense of safety. Callan looked at the floor and played the ruined man. Then my mother turned to me and said, in a voice sweet enough for the next table to hear, "Avery, honey, you and Miles have been blessed with stability. Some people receive children, some receive resources. We don't always get to choose how God asks us to serve." That was when Sloane delivered the line from the beginning, the one about baby money without a baby, and my mother did not correct her. She let it land. She let the silence gather around me like dust. A few people looked away. One woman from choir lowered her eyes to her plate. My brother stared at me as if daring me to be wounded in a way he could use. I felt the old shame rise from a place deeper than thought, a hot, familiar tide. 4 years of waiting rooms. 4 years of pretending I was fine when nurses said, "Maybe next cycle." 4 years of buying small socks once and hiding them in the back of a drawer because hope had embarrassed me. Then I touched the folder and remembered that pain was not the only thing I had brought with me. I said, "Before we discuss what you believe I owe Callan, I want everyone at this table to understand the actual numbers." My mother's smile flickered, then recovered. "This is not one of your client meetings," she said, still pleasant, still performing. "We are not here to be audited." I opened the folder anyway. "That's exactly the difference between us," I said. "You came here to pressure me. I came here to reconcile the account." Miles stood behind my chair, silent, not looming, not interfering, just present enough that my family could not later pretend the room had been gentle. I laid down the first page, the new account confirmation with personal details blacked out, and explained that the savings they had been discussing was no longer at the old bank and had not been accessible since the night after I overheard them through the kitchen window. My mother's face changed so quickly that I almost missed the first version of it. Surprise came first, then calculation, then anger dressed as hurt. "You listened at my window," she said, loud enough to invite judgment. I looked at her and answered in the same level voice I use when a client discovers payroll taxes are not optional. "I came to bring you food. I heard you assign my savings to Callan before I knocked." Callan's head snapped up. Sloane's mouth opened. My father closed his eyes. I placed the second page on the table, the alert from the bank about the attempted movement from the caregiver account, followed by the sealed envelope. "This is the old account from Grandma Iris's care," I said. "Mom went to the bank about it after mentioning it to me on the phone. The balance remaining in that account is hers, so I withdrew it and brought it here. Every cent. I am not taking money that belongs to her, and after today, I will sign whatever the bank needs to close the account permanently." I slid the envelope toward my mother. For the first time since I arrived, she did not touch what I handed her. Then I laid down the ledger. The fellowship hall seemed to shrink around the table. I had expected rage, but the first sound was only paper against plastic as the pages spread beneath my fingers. "This is what I have already given this family since 2013, I said. $31,970. Every line has a date, a reason, and proof. Apartment deposit, medical bill, business license, car payment, rent, groceries, utilities, Grandma's uncovered expenses. None of it includes birthdays, holidays, or ordinary gifts. This is only money given because someone told me there was an emergency." I pointed to the last column. "This is what came back." My brother stared at the zeros like they were personally insulting him. "You kept score?" he said, his voice cracking into anger because shame had nowhere else to go. "All these years, you were keeping a little list?" Sloane grabbed the page, skimmed it, and said, "Real family doesn't do this." I looked at her then, really looked, at the woman who had used the emptiest room in my heart as a weapon and still believed herself generous. "Real family does not build a lifestyle on someone else's silence," I said. "And if you didn't want a record, you should have stopped making transactions." My mother recovered enough to reach for her oldest tool. Her eyes filled. Her voice trembled. The room around us noticed because she meant it to. "After everything I sacrificed, after raising you, after keeping this family together with nothing but faith and hard work, you bring papers into the house of God to humiliate your own mother. It might have worked once. It had worked 100 times in kitchens, hospital corridors, parking lots, and holiday tables where I mistook her tears for proof that I was wrong. But this time, I had seen her at the bank before she saw me at the table. I had heard her plan before she softened it into need. You chose this room," I said. "You chose the audience. I only brought the facts." Callan shoved his chair back and said I was acting superior because I had married a man with steady hands and steady paychecks. He said Miles had turned me cold. He said I had forgotten where I came from, which was rich, considering where most of my money had gone. Then he made the mistake that finally broke my mother's careful theater. He pointed at the folder and said, "That money was always family money anyway." Several people nearby heard it. I saw them hear it. My mother saw them hear it too, and for one clean second, the mask slipped not because she felt guilty, but because Callan had spoken the family religion out loud in public. I removed the folded note from the back of the packet and placed it in front of him. "This is your handwriting," I said. $6,000 from the first truck failure. You wrote that you would repay me when the business turned profit." He stared at the page, then laughed once, ugly and small. "That was a joke." I nodded. "I know. That is why you forgot it. I kept it because even jokes can be useful when they tell the truth." Sloane tried to reach for her phone, maybe to record me, maybe to perform outrage, so I placed her printed message beside the note. The one about imaginary nursery plans. Her hand stopped halfway to her purse. My mother looked down at Sloane's text, and something like irritation passed through her face, not at the cruelty, but at the inconvenience of proof. That was the moment I understood her more clearly than I ever had. She did not hate me. In some bent, possessive way, she loved me. But her love had always required me to be available. Available to soothe, to solve, to cover, to absorb, to understand. The second I became unavailable, her love started searching for a name that would make my boundary sound like betrayal. Selfish, cold, ungrateful, proud. All the labels were ready because she had needed them long before I gave her a reason to use them. I stood. Not because I wanted drama, but because I no longer wanted to speak from a chair they had placed me in. "You asked for $52,000, I said. "You planned it before you asked me. You discussed my savings in your kitchen as if I were an account with a person attached. You tried the caregiver account before you sat down with me honestly. You mocked the reason Miles and I saved that money, and now you want to call my refusal a failure of love." My voice did not shake. That surprised me more than it surprised them. So let me be clear. I am not paying Callan's debt. I am not opening another account to this family. I am not explaining my medical life to earn basic decency. I am not the emergency fund anymore. My mother whispered my name like a warning, but the warning had no door left to open. I picked up the envelope marked with her balance and placed it directly in front of her. "Your money is here. My records are here. My answer is no." The word landed quietly, almost too quietly for how long it had taken me to earn it. No lightning struck. The ceiling did not cave in. My mother did not vanish into smoke. She simply stared at me as if I had become fluent in a language she had spent 34 years making sure I never learned. The explosion came after the silence. Runa stood so quickly her chair scraped backward and snapped everyone's attention toward us. She called me cruel. Callan called me a fraud, though even he did not seem to know what fraud he meant. Sloane said I had ruined them over pride, over selfishness, over money I would probably waste on another failed treatment anyway. Miles moved then, not toward her, only one step closer to me, and the look he gave the table was enough to remind them there were witnesses beyond the ones my mother had chosen. I raised one hand slightly, not to calm them, but to stop him from carrying my anger for me. This was mine. I had not come this far to let anyone else own the final inch. People in the fellowship hall were openly watching now. My mother realized it too late. She had counted on public pressure without respecting the risk of public proof. Her face did something I had never seen before. It emptied. The tears stopped because tears require a story, and for the first time, she was not sure which story the room believed. She looked at the ledger, the envelope, the note, the printed message, the bank alert. She looked at Miles. Then she looked at me, and beneath all her fury I saw the small, stunned recognition of a woman who had reached for a handle and found the door not only locked, but labeled. They left in pieces. Sloane went first, muttering that she would never forgive me, as if forgiveness from her had been a currency I accepted. Callan followed, red-faced and loud, promising that one day I would need family and nobody would come. My father lingered just long enough to pick up the envelope because my mother would not. He held it in both hands, that plain little packet of money I did not owe her but returned anyway, and for a moment I thought he might finally say the thing that would make him a father inside the story instead of a witness beside it. He only said, "This got out of hand." I looked at him and said, "No." It finally got written down. He had no answer for that, so he walked away. The aftermath was not cinematic in the way people imagine revenge should be. Nobody was arrested. Nobody fainted into the dessert table. The church did not burst into applause, though Mrs. Bell from choir did squeeze my shoulder near the coffee urn and say, very softly, "Good for you, honey," before pretending she had only come over for napkins. Callan did not receive $52,000. The collectors did what collectors are paid to do. The food truck was repossessed before the end of summer, and he and Sloane moved into my parents' guest room with 2 storage units and a marriage that suddenly had nowhere glamorous to perform. My mother told anyone who would listen that I had changed, which was the first accurate thing she said about me. For 3 months, she did not call. The silence was not peaceful at first. It had weight. I would see her name absent from my phone and feel both relief and grief, braided so tightly I could not tell which one hurt more. Some mornings I woke ready to apologize for protecting myself because old training does not disappear just because you win one confrontation. Miles never mocked that part. He never said, "Why do you care?" He knew caring was not the weakness. Caring had never been the weakness. The weakness had been confusing care with surrender. In September, my father mailed the closing documents for the caregiver account. No note, no apology, just the forms with his careful signature and my mother's sharper one beneath it. I signed where the bank required, sent them back, and watched the last old financial tie dissolve into paperwork. It should have felt small. It did not. It felt like a lock turning inside my chest. One account closed, one role closed, one version of daughterhood closed. I sat in my car outside the post office afterward and cried for 10 minutes, not because I wanted the account back, but because I finally understood how long I had been leaving doors open for people who never knocked before entering. Miles and I kept our appointment that fall. I will not turn that part into a promise the universe has not made yet. I will only say the money was still there when we needed it. Every boring, sacred dollar. Every lunch packed, every vacation skipped. Every careful choice that my family had mistaken for unused abundance. I sat in the clinic waiting room with Miles beside me, his thumb moving slowly across my knuckles, and for the first time in years, I did not feel guilty that hope cost money. Hope costs what it costs. So does freedom. The difference is that one gives life back to you, and the other takes it while calling itself family. My mother eventually called about Thanksgiving as if nothing had happened. Her voice was stiff, formal, almost businesslike. She asked whether Miles and I would be joining everyone, which was her way of offering me the chance to return to the old arrangement without requiring her to admit she had broken it. I told her we had other plans. She waited for me to fill the silence with apology. I let the silence remain empty. Then she said, "I hope you're happy with the choices you made." I looked across the kitchen at the drawer where the black folder rested, quiet and dated and true. "I'm at peace with them," I said. It was not the answer she wanted, which made it the first answer in a long time that belonged completely to me. I still love them. That is the part people want to simplify because revenge feels cleaner when love disappears. Mine did not. I love my mother's laugh when she forgets to be guarded. I love the father who taught me how to patch drywall before he taught me how to leave a room. I love the little brother who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during thunderstorms. Love stayed. Access ended. Those are different doors, and I wish someone had told me sooner that I was allowed to close one without burning down the other. The black folder is still in my desk. I do not open it often. I do not need to. It is not a shrine to anger. It is a receipt for the week I stopped negotiating with people who had already spent me in their minds. My mother thought the church hall would make me too embarrassed to refuse. My brother thought my grief made my savings less real. His wife thought cruelty would pass as honesty if she said it with enough confidence. They were all wrong, in the same expensive way. They believed the old Avery would show up, the one who paid quickly and cried privately and called it love before anyone could call her selfish. But the woman who walked into that fellowship hall was not old Avery. She was the woman from the porch who heard her future being assigned through a window and finally decided to take it back before asking permission. She was the woman who moved the money, printed the records, returned what was not hers, and let the people who called themselves family meet the numbers they had created. She did not shout. She did not beg. She did not need to destroy them. She only closed the account they had mistaken for a daughter and let the balance speak. Commentary time. Let's talk about what really happened in Avery's story, because on the surface, it looks like a family argument about money, debt, and one woman finally saying no. But underneath that, this story is about something much more intimate and much more dangerous. It is about what happens when a family stops seeing a person as a person and starts seeing her as a solution. Avery was not just being asked for help. She was being assigned a role. She was being treated like the quiet account everyone could withdraw from whenever life became uncomfortable. And the most painful part is that nobody in that family seemed to think they were doing anything wrong. They had convinced themselves that because Avery had always helped before, she had somehow given up the right to refuse in the future. That is what makes this story so sharp. Runa did not sit Avery down with honesty. She did not say, "Your brother is in trouble, and I know this is unfair, but can we talk?" She did something colder. She discussed Avery's savings before Avery even entered the room. She spoke about that money as if it had already been approved, as if Avery's labor, marriage, hope, medical pain, and private future were all just pieces of a family budget that Runa had the authority to rearrange. And that is a specific kind of betrayal. It is not loud at first. It is not dramatic in the beginning. It sounds almost practical. It sounds like a mother managing a crisis. But once you listen closely, you hear the entitlement underneath every word. What struck me most was not even that Callan needed money. People fall into debt. People make reckless choices. People panic. That part is human, even when it is irresponsible. What struck me was the moral confidence with which everyone pointed toward Avery. Callan had made the mistake, but Avery was expected to absorb the consequence. Sloane had no respect for Avery's pain, but she still felt entitled to Avery's sacrifice. Runa had not protected her daughter's dignity, but she wanted access to her daughter's savings. Ellis, the father, did not create the storm, but he stood quietly under the roof and let Avery be pushed into the rain. That kind of silence is not harmless. Sometimes silence is just betrayal wearing softer shoes. And then there is that brutal line from Sloane about baby money when there was no baby. Let's be honest about how vicious that is. Money can be replaced. A business can collapse and be rebuilt. A truck can be repossessed, and another one can eventually be bought. But when someone takes your deepest private grief and turns it into a reason you owe them more, that is not just manipulation. That is emotional vandalism. Sloane looked at a woman who had spent years hoping, grieving, trying, waiting, and surviving disappointment, and she decided that pain made Avery's savings less legitimate. Think about that. She did not just want money. She wanted to redefine Avery's hope as waste. That is why Avery's calm matters so much. Her revenge was not loud because loudness would have given her family exactly what they wanted. If she had screamed, they could have called her unstable. If she had cried, they could have called her fragile. If she had stormed out, they could have called her selfish and dramatic. But she did something far more threatening. She stayed composed. She moved carefully. She documented everything. She let them reveal themselves while she gathered the truth. That is a different kind of power. It is not the power of winning an argument in the moment. It is the power of refusing to participate in the emotional chaos that other people use to hide the facts. Avery understood something that a lot of people only learn after years of being drained. You cannot win a manipulation game by being more emotional than the manipulator. You win by leaving the game. Runa's whole strategy depended on Avery reacting like the old Avery, the daughter who apologizes when she is wounded, the daughter who pays to restore peace, the daughter who accepts cruelty because the alternative is being labeled difficult. But the moment Avery moved the money, the entire family structure shifted. Not because she destroyed anyone, not because she attacked anyone, but because she removed the access they had mistaken for love. And that phrase is the heart of the whole story. Love is not access. Loving your family does not mean handing them unlimited entry into your bank account, your marriage, your grief, your future, or your peace. Loving someone does not mean giving them the right to make decisions with your resources before they have even respected your boundaries. Avery did not stop loving her family. That is what makes the story more mature and more painful. She still loved them. She still saw their fear, their weakness, their history, and even their humanity. But she finally understood that love without limits becomes a form of self-erasure. Ask yourself this: how many times had Avery probably told herself, "It's just this once"? One deposit, one bill, one emergency, one short-term loan, one holiday rescue, one quiet transfer. And then years later, those just this once moments had become a pattern so normalized that her family no longer remembered they were debts. That is how exploitation often works inside families. It does not usually begin with a villain twirling a mustache. It begins with need. Then gratitude fades. Then expectation replaces gratitude. Then entitlement replaces expectation. And eventually, the person who helped out of love is treated like a traitor for asking where all the love went in return. The ledger was one of the strongest symbols in the story because it turned emotion into evidence. Families like Avery's often survive on fog. Nobody wants exact numbers. Nobody wants dates. Nobody wants receipts. They want phrases like, "After everything we've done," "Family helps family," and "Don't be selfish." Those phrases are powerful because they are vague. You cannot audit a guilt trip unless someone starts writing things down. Avery did. She took years of emotional pressure and translated it into columns: date, amount, purpose, proof, repaid. And once she did that, the family myth could not stand upright anymore. That is a powerful idea for anyone watching. The truth does not become cruel just because it becomes specific. Sometimes people accuse you of keeping score because the score reveals what they have been taking. They do not mind the imbalance when it benefits them. They mind the record of the imbalance. Callan was not offended when Avery gave him money. He was offended when Avery remembered it. Sloane was not ashamed to insult Avery's future. She was alarmed when her words were printed on paper. Runa was not embarrassed to stage a public confrontation. She was embarrassed when Avery brought public proof. That tells us everything. Now let's talk about Runa, because she is not a simple villain. She is controlling, yes. She is manipulative, absolutely. She humiliates her daughter in public, uses family language as a weapon, and tries to access money before having an honest conversation. But the story also gives us a glimpse of her fear. She grew up with financial instability. She knows what it feels like to lose security. That background matters because it explains some of her behavior, but it does not excuse it. And that distinction is important. Understanding someone's wound does not mean volunteering to bleed for them forever. A lot of toxic family dynamics hide behind old pain. A parent may say, "I had a hard life," and that may be true. But a hard life does not give anyone the right to spend their child's future. Fear can explain control, but it does not make control loving. Runa's childhood may have taught her to panic around money, but instead of healing that fear, she outsourced it to Avery. She made Avery the stabilizer, the fixer, the emotional insurance policy. And when Avery finally stepped out of that role, Runa experienced it as betrayal because she had confused dependency with family unity. Ellis is also worth discussing because passive characters can do enormous damage. He did not mock Avery like Sloane. He did not demand like Callan. He did not orchestrate like Runa. But he permitted. He softened the manipulation. He gave it a gentle voice. He told Avery she had always been the one who could handle things, which sounds like praise until you realize it is just another way of handing her the bill. Some people do not pressure you with cruelty. They pressure you with disappointment. They make you feel that refusing is not just a choice, but a failure to be who they need you to be. And that raises a hard question for the audience. Who is more dangerous, the person who demands from you, or the person who quietly expects you to surrender because you always have? There may not be one clean answer, but in Avery's case, Ellis's silence helped build the cage. Every time he failed to interrupt Runa, every time he looked away when Callan took too much, every time he let Avery become the responsible one without asking what it cost her, he participated. Not all betrayal comes with a raised voice. Some betrayal sits in the corner, holding a coffee cup, hoping the storm passes over someone else. Now, Callan's entitlement is another layer. He does not simply ask for help. He resents Avery for being stable. That is very common in families where one person has been responsible and another has been protected from consequences. The responsible person's discipline starts to look like privilege to the irresponsible person. Callan sees Avery's savings and does not see sacrifice. He sees unfair abundance. He does not see packed lunches, postponed plans, medical bills, fear, or self-control. He sees money that could fix his problem. And because he wants it badly enough, he invents a moral theory where Avery is wrong for keeping what she earned. That is why his line about family money matters so much. He says the quiet part out loud. In his mind, Avery's money was never fully hers. Her stability belonged to the group. Her restraint created a surplus that the reckless people felt entitled to spend. That is a deeply unfair dynamic, and many viewers will recognize it immediately. The person who saves becomes the backup plan. The person who says no to unnecessary spending becomes the emergency fund. The person who avoids chaos becomes responsible for everyone else's chaos. And then, if that person refuses, they are accused of thinking they are better than everyone else. But Avery does not think she is better. That is the beauty of her character. She is not arrogant. She is not cruel. She is not trying to humiliate them for sport. She even returns the money that belongs to her mother because she wants the ending to be clean. That detail matters. Revenge stories often become satisfying because someone gets destroyed. But this story is satisfying because Avery refuses to become dirty in order to defeat dirty behavior. She does not steal. She does not lie. She does not exaggerate. She does not need to. She simply tells the truth in a room where everyone was counting on her silence. The church fellowship hall scene is especially powerful because Runa chose the setting as a weapon. She believed public space would trap Avery into compliance. She assumed politeness would work in her favor. That is a very real manipulation tactic. Create an audience, then force the victim to choose between self-protection and social discomfort. Runa wanted Avery to feel too embarrassed to say no, but the audience cuts both ways. If you bring pressure into public, you risk having truth arrive there too. Runa wanted witnesses for Avery's surrender. Instead, she got witnesses for Avery's boundary. That reversal is the revenge, not the debt, not the repossession, not the embarrassment. The revenge is that Avery stops performing the role they wrote for her. She walks into the scene as the daughter they underestimated and quietly becomes the witness they cannot control. She lets them speak. She lets them overplay. She lets Sloane's cruelty hang in the air. Then she places the records on the table. That is cinematic because it is restrained. The power is not in a dramatic speech. The power is in the timing. She waits until their entitlement is visible, then she gives it paperwork. Let's also notice how Miles supports her. He is not written as a loud savior. He does not storm into the family conflict and take over. He does not make himself the hero of his wife's pain. He gives one crucial piece of practical advice. Move the money first. Then he respects her enough to let her act. That is a healthy kind of love. He does not infantilize Avery. He does not reduce her to someone who needs rescuing. He understands that she needs backing, not replacement. That difference is everything. Some partners try to protect by taking control. Miles protects by helping Avery regain control. And honestly, that makes the IVF fund even more emotional. This was not random savings. This was hope turned into numbers. Every dollar in that account carried a story. Every transfer represented a choice they had made together. When the family tried to take that money, they were not just threatening financial security. They were threatening a future Avery and Miles had suffered to keep possible. Whether or not that future became a child, the money represented their right to keep hoping on their own terms. That is why Sloane's insult is so unforgivable. She tried to make Avery's hope seem imaginary because it had not produced visible proof yet. There is a larger truth here. People often respect outcomes more than effort. If Avery had a baby in her arms, maybe the family would have hesitated before mocking the fund. Maybe not, but maybe. Because then the money would have a visible human symbol. But because her hope was still private, still uncertain, still painful, they treated it like an optional luxury. That is cruel. A dream does not become less real because it has not arrived yet. A medical struggle does not become less serious because other people cannot see it. And a woman's future does not become available because her grief is quiet. Avery's final boundary is not just, I will not pay. It is much bigger. It is, I will not explain myself into basic respect. That is a boundary many people need but struggle to claim. When you are used to being misunderstood, you start thinking the right explanation will save you. You believe if you can just make them understand how hard it was, how much you sacrificed, how deeply they hurt you, they will finally stop. But some people already understand enough. They simply benefit from pretending they do not. Avery realizes this. That is why she does not spend the whole scene begging them to care about her pain. She gives the facts. She gives the answer. She lets their reaction reveal their character. That is one reason this story feels so emotionally satisfying. The revenge is not built on cruelty. It is built on clarity. Avery's calm becomes dangerous because it cannot be manipulated. Runa can cry, Callan can rage, Sloane can insult, Ellis can sigh, but none of it changes the numbers. None of it reopens the account. None of it rewrites the messages. And most importantly, none of it moves Avery back into the old role. For once, the family has to sit with the consequences of not having her as their safety net. Now I want to ask you something while you are listening. Have you ever been treated like Avery? Have you ever been the one everyone calls only when something breaks? The one who is praised for being strong, but rarely cared for when strength gets heavy? The one who is told, you're so responsible, when what they really mean is, we are counting on you not to have needs of your own, because that is the emotional trap at the center of this story. Responsibility becomes identity. Identity becomes expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. And by the time you finally say no, people act shocked because they never realized you were a person making choices. They thought you were a function. And if you have been in that position, Avery's story is not telling you to stop loving people. It is not telling you to become cold. It is not telling you to abandon everyone the first time they ask for help. The story is asking something much more uncomfortable. Can you tell the difference between helping and being harvested? Can you tell when generosity has become a system that only works because you keep losing? Can you notice when people praise your heart while quietly depending on your lack of boundaries? Those questions are not easy, but they are necessary. The aftermath also feels realistic because it does not tie everything up with a perfect apology. Runa does not suddenly confess. Callan does not become humble overnight. Sloane does not send a beautiful message saying she was wrong. That is not how these dynamics usually resolve. More often, the person who sets the boundary gets punished with silence, gossip, and emotional distance. The family does not always heal immediately. Sometimes the first result of telling the truth is loneliness. But that loneliness can still be healthier than belonging to a place where your value depends on how much you can absorb. Avery's silence after the confrontation is different from the silence before it. Before, silence was submission. After, silence becomes peace. That is an important shift. She no longer uses quiet to keep everyone comfortable. She uses quiet to protect herself. She no longer chases her mother's approval. She no longer fills awkward pauses with apologies. She no longer performs guilt to prove she is loving. She allows people to be disappointed in the version of her they can no longer use. That is not bitterness. That is adulthood with a spine. The closing of the caregiver account is another meaningful piece. It is small on paper, but huge emotionally. That account represented unfinished access. It was a leftover door from a previous chapter, and Runa tried to use it. Once it closes, Avery's financial life finally belongs fully to Avery and Miles. That is why the paperwork feels almost ceremonial. Not every victory looks like applause. Sometimes victory looks like a bank form, a signature, and the quiet knowledge that nobody can reach through that door again. What I admire most about Avery is that she keeps her own hands clean. She could have exposed them more brutally. She could have posted screenshots. She could have humiliated Sloane in a bigger way. She could have turned the entire church against her mother, but she does only what is necessary. That restraint makes her stronger, not weaker. Revenge without restraint can turn into the same ugliness it is trying to punish. Avery's justice is painful because it is accurate. It is not inflated. It is not theatrical beyond what the family forced into the room. She gives them exactly the truth, and the truth is enough. And that may be the deepest message of this story, even though we are not treating it like a classroom lesson. The truth, when properly kept, does not need decoration. A dated message is powerful. A signed note is powerful. A bank alert is powerful. A ledger is powerful. Not because paperwork is more important than emotion, but because paperwork protects emotion from being rewritten by people who are louder than you. Avery's family had spent years rewriting her generosity as obligation. The records stopped them. The records said, "No, this happened. This amount left. This amount never returned. This message was sent. This attempt was made." That is how a quiet person wins against a noisy narrative. So when Avery says no, that word carries the weight of everything behind it. It is not impulsive. It is not petty. It is not revenge for one insult. It is the final line after years of one-way sacrifice. It is the first honest answer in a family that had trained her to confuse compliance with goodness. And once she says it, the room cannot go back to the old arrangement. That is what makes the ending feel powerful. Not everyone changes, but the system changes because Avery no longer agrees to be its foundation. In the end, Callan faces consequences. Sloane loses the comfort of looking superior. Runa loses control. Ellis loses the luxury of pretending neutrality is innocence, and Avery gains something far more valuable than revenge. She gains ownership of her own life. The money matters, yes. The IVF fund matters deeply. But the real victory is that Avery stops asking for permission to protect what is hers. She stops apologizing for having a future. She stops letting other people decide which parts of her pain count. And maybe that is why this story stays with us. Because most people know what it feels like to be misunderstood by strangers. That hurts. But we survive it. What cuts deeper is being misunderstood by the people who know exactly where to aim. Avery's family knew her softness. They knew her loyalty. They knew her longing. They knew her history of saying yes. And they used all of it. But they forgot one thing. The person who keeps the books eventually sees the pattern. And once she sees it clearly, she may stop being available for the next withdrawal. So I want to leave you with this question. Was Avery wrong for bringing the folder into that room, or was the folder the only reason the truth survived the room? Would her family have listened if she had simply said, "You hurt me"? Would they have respected a quiet no without the bank records, the ledger, and the messages? Or did they make proof necessary by spending years treating her kindness like an account with no limit? Think about that, because the answer says a lot about how power works inside families. My opinion is simple. Avery did not betray her family. She interrupted a pattern that was already betraying her. She did not destroy Callan's life. Callan's decisions did that. She did not humiliate her mother. Her mother chose the public stage. She did not weaponize grief. Sloane did. Avery simply refused to keep financing a version of family that required her to disappear. And sometimes that is the most dignified revenge a person can take. Not revenge that ruins someone else, but revenge that finally stops them from ruining you. If this story hit something personal in you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to become the bad guy just to protect your peace? Have you ever had to say no to people who were used to your yes? Share your thoughts, share your story, and subscribe to Revenge Stories for more emotional family betrayals, hidden truths, and quiet justice that finally brings the truth into the light.